Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Eidson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast, where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. For a long time, procurement has got feedback that our terminology has a distancing or alienating effect on internal stakeholders and budget owners. But if language has the power to push people away, it can also be used to purposefully clarify, align, and collaborate. Well, my guest on the show today is Steve Wills. Steve is the founder and managing director of Procurement Central, and he formerly served as Procurement Advisor to the 2012 London Olympic Games Organising Committee. Steve also has extensive business experience with blue chip organizations, and he's worked with leaders in industry and commerce as a CPO to transform complex procurement functions. And in this interview, Steve shares some of the ways that procurement can use language and messaging to bridge the gap between ourselves and the other functions in the organizations. We also discuss a more expansive notion of stakeholder management that procurement could embrace if we want to build stronger relationships with the business. And finally, we dive into the Olympic Games security category to discuss what to do when circumstances call for pragmatism instead of our polished procurement processes. Now, one last thing that I have to call out, and it has nothing to do with procurement, but today's episode is episode 333. Well, for listeners of a certain generation who also like cricket, like myself, 333 is the number of runs that then England captain Graham Gooch scored exactly 30 years ago in a single cricket inning against India. And it was one of the biggest sporting memories that I had of my childhood. So I'm thrilled that we have joined the 333 club, and it's just something that I had to mention. So let's go back to procurement, and I start by asking Steve if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
I'm one of the few people, I think, who found procurement. So my very first role, my very first job was working in a warehouse. I had been offered an engineer's role, but for some reason I felt working in a warehouse was the right move when I left school. Mm-hmm. And because of that, because there was stock and stock control, I was able to start to take some courses, which eventually led to the professional CIPS exams. Yeah. So I can say that after school, I found procurement. I know a lot of people tell me that they stumbled into procurement, mm-hmm. or they found it lurking around the corner. But for me, it was definitely, shall we say, a role that I found, and I found I had professional qualifications. Yeah. And then after the warehouse management, I became a buyer. So, yeah, and stayed in the profession ever since.
So, I'm not going to ask you how long you've been in the profession, but I know you've been and seen a few different things over the years. I often look back and think, in some regards, I kind of have this frustration that I question, have we actually moved on in the last 20 years? I think about some of the earlier roles that I was in, mostly in automotive. And, 20 years ago in automotive, I think we were still fairly advanced, even though we didn't know it at the time, in what we use in the methodologies and bringing in category strategy and kind of global sourcing and all those good things. As you look back and reflect on where we are today as a profession, I mean, have you seen a lot of progress? Are you excited about the future? Kind of what's your kind of position on the health of procurement right now?
So I think the answer to that, or to pick up on your point, is that, as you mentioned, when you're actually in it, I'm sure there's an analogy of the frog or the toad in the boiling water, and it doesn't actually feel the water getting warmer around it. I suppose it's a little bit like that. When you're in it, you don't notice it as much. But when you talk to people on the, shall we say, on the outside, or you step back from it, there's been, as you say, there has been a lot of progress, and certainly we can say right now with COVID and the supply chain issues of critical items, let's say that the spotlight has definitely been on the importance of supply chain and procurement, and let's say that's elevated that particular profession. But certainly the changes I've seen is more professionalism, more leadership skills, more people choosing it as a profession, as you started out with your first question, more people choosing it as a profession, and of course more use of e-tools and trying to automate procurement. So, when I joined, it was probably called buying, then purchasing, buying and purchasing. And then as it matured, the profession matured, procurement became the word that was used to reflect a strategic function. So there's definitely been progress, maturity, development of the profession over time, for sure.
Now, you spend a lot of time right now training and in learning and development in the procurement space. And I'm interested to know, when you look at the demand for procurement training, do you see that there's a shifting demand in terms of the skills that companies want to train their people on? Is it moving from the technical skills to those softer skills, or, is it still very much about let's get the basics right first and focus on the technical skills?
It's so when I got into, as you say, tutoring, training and development, and particularly public speaking, I found there was a brilliant phrase that if I was ever asked a difficult question, I only needed to say, "It all depends," and that that always brought me a bit of time. And I think that's a bit of an answer to the question you raised. It all depends. If you talk to, and I think that under this heading of speaking the language of procurement, I think this sort of goes to the heart of it. There's people around procurement. If you think that procurement are right at the centre of the pond or the target, if you will, there's people in the procurement function who have a view on, as you say, softer skills, more strategic skills, something, which is called value, which we forever are debating. And then you talk to the rest of the people around it. You can say they're the business or other people that we come into contact with. And for them, they're at a different stage. It's the fundamentals. For a lot of people, they'll use words like price. They'll use reduction in price. And of course, for the procurement community, they'll want to know more about cost analysis. So, and cost reduction and sustainable cost reduction, and moving into, for them, more exciting areas like sustainability generally and environmental issues and all these value add-ons that procurement get involved in. But it all depends who's funding the training, and it all depends who's looking, shall we say, as a senior in the organisation. If it's the finance director, I think they might have a different objective than the procurement director, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying that they're not aware of all the broader aspects, but certainly operational directors and finance directors, I think it's fair to say it would be more of the basics, more of the essentials, if we can call it that, than it would the procurement community, who are looking to develop their language, to create their own language. Probably, if it's fair to say, become even a more intellectual function, and get the recognition from the business, because I think that's one of the things procurement are constantly feeling, that they're not always recognized in the business as a strategic leader, strategic function. So for them, I think you could say it's the softer skills, it's the strategic, broader business skills, but for the rest of the business, it could be a more the basics.
Yeah, it's interesting how you kind of talked about that, because my next question was going to be around asking you if you felt there was a disconnect between how procurement sees ourselves and our potential versus what the rest of the business sees us as. And I think, you talked there about that disconnect. So I think to kind of go further on that theme or that line of thinking, if there's a disconnect between how procurement thinks of our potential versus what the business sees as procurement, is that because of the language that we use when we talk about what we do? Or, how can we bridge that gap? What are some of the ways that you think we can bridge that gap? And is languaging and the way we sell and talk about what we do a big part of that?
Yes, so absolutely is the answer to your question. And what I would introduce as the glue, if I can use that phrase, as the glue between the business and procurement are also leadership skills. Mm-hmm. So what do I mean by that? Well, you've already mentioned softer skills. General business skills is a good one. Is a good one, but knowledge of the business you're working with. So whenever you go into a business, as I do a lot now, the phrase you hear is, it's different here. Steve, it's different here. Mm-hmm. It's no good bringing your one-size-fits-all because it's different here. So I think there's something I will acknowledge is that there is one thing that's different, and that is the knowledge of products, or in the operational areas. So, oil and gas is different, obviously, to automotive, is different to pharmaceutical. Yeah. So knowledge of the business language, shall we say, meaning just what do they do? Being able to converse with people in the business as a leader, as an equal, is essential, as you say, to bridge that gap. And being brave enough, because one of the big things that procurement can do to shape the specification right at the start of a process is to challenge the business, challenge the business on what they want. Everyone wants the best quality and the best specification, but it's not always what they need. So sometimes, we need to be stronger, we need to be braver, because we're up against senior people, and sometimes, our leadership skills need to go up a notch. And that's not all about being aggressive. That certainly isn't about being aggressive, but it's about understanding those people, their different personality traits. Some people are very logic and very detailed. Others, of course, are, just give me the headlines, just give me the exact summary. So I think being able to read people in our leadership skills is probably also the glue that sits between understanding the business and getting across procurement's benefits and procurement's role, strategic procurement's role in a business.
Yeah, I think that's something that can sometimes make it a challenging, that a lot of buyers are in challenging positions, especially when you are more of a generalist role than a specialist. And I say that, having come from being a generalist for most of my career, as a practitioner, is that, to be able to be in that position to even be influenceable, you need to understand truly the ins and outs of what it is that you're buying. And, that someone needs to look at you as somebody who's knowledgeable about it, whether it's something that's a direct material, whether it's an indirect service, whatever that may be. However, something I always say is that you can be the best informed person in a particular category in the world, and if you don't have the influence and persuasion skills, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
because no one's going to listen to you.
Completely agree.
So
completely agree.
It's kind of bringing those two together, really. I think a part of it, and I'd again love your perspective on how you see people who are successful at doing this. What is it that they're doing is talking in the terms of the business, not in the terms of procurement. Kind of taking off the procurement hat. And do you find that that's something that makes an impact?
Yeah. So I learned a long time ago, particularly when you're, what should we call people, stakeholders, the internal client. Let's focus on that group of people because stakeholders is quite a diverse range of people, of course. But let's say that whenever you're talking to stakeholders, and when I was with the Olympic Games, the stakeholders weren't just in the business.
Yeah.
There were a lot of interested parties outside of, shall we call it, the organisation. So certainly your ability to pitch to the right people in the right way and get and understand their point of view. It's all about them, as they say. It's not really about you. The only bit about you is how you can bring your key or core procurement solutions to their business issues. But the first place to start is it's all about them. It's not all about you. So the last thing when you're talking to stakeholders is to step in. And we do this, and there's a good reason for it. We do it because not everybody over the time has asked us for an opinion. So when we get the chance to talk, we do like to be a bit verbose, and we do like to get our phrases, our special language, opinions. We like people to listen to us, but actually that's not the way to go about it at all. We need to be more, of course, consultative and find business solutions, as also, including, of course, procurement solutions to that. So I think the way to do it is definitely our consultative approach with stakeholders and building relationships, internal relationships. We talk a lot about supplier relations. Well, that's kind of a given, isn't it? But the internal business relationships are sometimes a lot tougher than suppliers, but they're the key ones to build. And our ability as a relationship specialist is what makes the difference to bridging that gap.
Yeah. Now, I'd love, you mentioned the project that when you were working for the London 2020 Olympic Games, the organising committee, and you had, I think, probably one of the most difficult categories, the most highest profile categories at the time, which was security. I think there was probably not a day when security at the London 2012 Olympics wasn't a front page story or a headline on the BBC. I'd just love to know a little bit more about your experience, as the procurement professional in the room, of how you're able to go about your job, effectively driving the outcomes that were important to all those stakeholders, with so many different competing priorities.
Yeah, so I think that is a great illustration of leadership. I suppose none of all of these things that we're talking about, procurement language, here we would have to say the organization's language or the needs of the organization, and leadership, all of them are important, and they're all important in equal measure. But in this particular case, certainly the leadership skills, the ability. Someone once said that, what you discuss in the corridor or at the water cooler, meaning, or probably a little bit more over a coffee, if you can manage to grab a coffee, get in early. A lot of the seniors were in at the crack of dawn, and grabbing even if it's a walk back to the office with a coffee, a lot of that really makes a difference, because by the time you step into the meeting, obviously you're not suggesting for 1 minute that you're, you said influencing, I'm going to say manipulating, but anyway, not suggesting for a minute that you're going to change their opinion so much, but at least you've got a chance to, get points across that you're not going to get across in the meeting, because the meetings you're talking about, people will have heard of the Cobra security whenever there's a terrorist alert. You've got high-ranking Met Police officials there. You've got not MPs themselves, but you've got civil servants representing MPs. You've got the army, military. You've got lots and lots of people who are titled people, and they carry a huge amount of, one, experience, and two, influence. So it's as much what you can do to show them who you are and that you're working with them, that you're not a blocker to what we're trying to do. But there are some things that they need to be aware of that you're trying to find meet as a solution. So that was my experience. The meetings themselves were huge. They were incredibly in the real word here, in capitals, politically motivated. They were going straight back to government and the ministers. But it was as much, managing those meetings from the outside, if you will, getting round the stakeholders individually. We talk a lot about that, but that really was, my time was absolutely spent, 80% of my time was spent stakeholder managing, and 20% was spent actually working on the categories of security, because it was really, the decisions were key, meaning how we financed security following the London bombs. Security trebled in terms of its requirements and its cost. Time was against us, that there was an immovable deadline. You couldn't tell Her Majesty the Queen that we're putting it off
for a
month because we've got a bit busy. So there was an immovable deadline. Time was against us. There was a lot of pressure just to get on and do it. Yet the procurement mantra that we work to is make sure that you understand the costs, that you've got the work packages. We've seen with COVID a lot of panic buying, and in fact, when the PPE equipment arrives, it's not fit for purpose. So you still have to follow the defined, let's call it best practice procurement rules, but you've got a heck of a lot of people, diverse set of stakeholders in very senior positions who you need to take with you on that journey.
Now, you actually just mentioned there about PPE and COVID, and it brought up a thought, that's related, I think, to your experience with the Olympic Games. You say that immovable date, and I remember at the time, there was a lot of, are we going to be ready? Are we not going to be ready? We got to train all these people, and all that good stuff. How can you think about retaining as much due diligence as you possibly can when you're on such a tight deadline? Because that's what a lot of folks are obviously struggling with right now. In suddenly you've got to wire $500,000 to a company that you've never even worked with before, sight unseen, before they'll ship any PPE to you. You have those a lot of weird situations. I'd just love to know how you approach that and how you advise others to approach it.
So I think and it's funny, funny in an ironic way, because the person I was working with at the Olympic Games, in fact Lord Dighton, but Paul Dighton, was asked to come in and resolve the PPE equipment for government. So it's sort of ironic that the very person that managed this, if you will, with Lord Coe, was the very person that government turned to when PPE equipment was the most serious thing in the country. But the answer to your question is pragmatism. I think is the key word here. So if you can't do the due diligence in the way that you've become accustomed or that you like, everybody wants to be a perfectionist, but you have to be a pragmatist first and foremost. And if you're in the situation of an immovable deadline and an urgency, yet you still need to do this to show transparency and show that you can justify borrowing money or getting money from Treasury, then you look to your own organisation and you look to see what we pay for IT, or is there an equivalent benchmarking model for uniforms or for CCTV equipment or fencing? Where else can you go if you can't get access? Because there was no motivation from the supplier to share that data, because why did they need to? They had the contract. All they wanted was if you not an open check. Well, they probably would.
It's a seller's market.
Check, they'd like you to. That's right. They just want you to approve that they can go out and buy materials. So what you need to. So there's no motivation for them to be open book or to assist in due diligence. I'm not saying they refused flatly. I'm simply saying it was taking a long, slow process. You go elsewhere. You look at benchmarking. You, in my case, contact people the network, the CIPS. Look at some of their information, their details, and some of the indices, and information is available. I'm not saying it's always 110% exactly what you would like under the circumstances, meaning perfect, but sometimes you do have to be a pragmatist. And of course, the other thing that we did was you look at a 2x2 matrix and you say something like long lead time and low risk. Long lead time, low risk, just you can do that. So materials for uniforms was the longest lead time and probably bore with it the lowest risk. So some things you can just get on and do. Of course, other things take more time, but in your project plan, you can schedule those and find the time to do those whilst you're getting on with the low risk, long lead time items in the first instance. But I would say, don't panic. It's being a pragmatist. It's there to be done. You can find solutions to it. You can find the data and the information to it, but it may not be, shall we call it, the traditional perfectionist route that some of us are used to going down.
Now, do you think that when you think about not necessarily the future of procurement, but how we can be more responsive to the needs of our business, that, we kind of look at processes as not being you got to check every box, because I think that's one of the things that sometimes holds us back. That you got to go through gate 1 and gate 2 and gate 3 and gate 4 and, on to gate 7 or whatever. And rather just being there being guideposts that you, at your discretion, can use when it's most appropriate.
And I think the two parts to that is exactly as you say, and the crowd check model, which we use a lot when we're teaching and we're talking, the portfolio analysis, is the best place to start, because not everything is a one-size-fits-all, as I mentioned before. And of course, where you do want, some areas you do want to be spending more time, and you do want to be putting people over the hurdles, if you like, meaning the appropriation requests, the different gates, the going to head office, coming back from head office. Some things are absolutely fits, but other things, heck, they don't.
Yeah.
Not everything needs to go through that. So it comes back to pragmatism, but people want to be assured that you're over the full spend in an organisation, but that the full spend in an organisation doesn't need, exactly as you say, 7 to 12 hurdles that they've got to go through, deep business cases, et cetera, et cetera. Some things can just go onto purchase to pay on a catalogue, have a delegated authority, and that's great. Because we can't be everywhere and we can't apply the same rigour for every category of spend in a business. So we need to decide where we do that. But I think a big part of it is going back to relationship. It's getting to know the stakeholders. It's not just waiting until something comes around from a specification for new spend. It's actually going out, talking to IT directors, manufacturing directors, and talking to the people usually that are the budget holders, and getting a relationship with them so they know that you are not this process clunky blocker. You're not the guy that just likes to stand there and say no and hold everything up, because we know in life we have to be, as I keep coming back to, pragmatic.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes these processes are an excuse for not having trust. And
absolutely, you could say not having trust, or not having the very things we're talking about, a knowledge of the business, not having experience. Some people, for some people coming, there was a time, I hope it's not the case now, where I used to hear this quite a lot. We're recruiting people to run a procurement function without any procurement experience. They felt that this was what's the word I'm looking for? That this was going to shake it up a bit.
Yeah, you don't have the baggage,
and of course,
of a career in procurement.
Of course, what you got, absolutely, that's right. And what you got with that was that their process would be very clunky, as I say, and very process orientated, because they didn't understand that you could, I often use the phrase, play tunes on it, that you could vary it, that you could adjust it, dependent on, it all depends, back to it all depends, dependent on the needs of the business. And of course, risk is a big part of what we do, and again, when you do the risk analysis, is there a high possibility and a high impact of risk, high, medium and low. And obviously if it's low, going back to my Olympic days, you can just get on and do it. It's a low risk to the business.
Yeah, it's, I feel that maybe it's at the beginning of transformations, and maybe it's because, the ROI of that is based on we're suddenly going to get all this control of the spend. And by getting control, and I use air quotes over the word control, of the spend means that we're going to be able to drive certain savings because, hey, look, at the business has done a really bad job. And that's where this trust thing comes in for me, is it's like, when you're not really having the empathy of the business and understanding what their true needs are and why their needs were not necessarily aligned with cost, it's easy to go in and say, well, there's all this low-hanging fruit and they didn't know what they were doing, and therefore we're going to take it all from them. And I just think that
that's right.
It's such a short-term mentality.
Short-term mentality, and as you say, it sours the relationship with the very people you should be building the relationship with. And also, if you go focused on, God forbid, price reduction, which is not what we want to do at all, but anyway, on cost reduction, it will be self-defeating, because you'll be looking to take cost out rather than find solution. If you go looking for solutions, naturally you will come across inefficiencies.
Yeah.
You will come across areas where you can take cost out, but do it with the business in mind first, not chasing. As I say, often the phrase price reduction is used, but don't go chasing the cost savings target, because then you'll destroy value.
Yeah.
You'll if not destroy it, you'll damage value.
And something I just add on that, for those that are having a second bite at the cherry almost, you're going through a transformation and you're looking at trying to build those bridges, or maybe it's somebody new, you've had a shake-up of what categories you're involved in, or you've been hired into the new organization. You're going to be met with a lot of skepticism. And so you really have to be overly cautious in how you approach that and how you talk about what you're doing, and then how you demonstrate it, so that folks can see that actually this time it is different, because we've been told this 5 times before, and 5 times out of 5 it's actually just been business as usual. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Steve, I know it's about time to wrap up. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing, your perspectives, your experience with the audience today. And I just have a last question, and it's always the easy question. And that is, if listeners would like to connect with you directly, outside of the podcast, where would be the best place or the best places for them to find you?
Well, they can find me as me, myself, and I. They can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Steve Wills, and just put procurement and they'll find me. But if they want to visit the website, there's a lot of material, there's a lot of resource on our website, and that's www.procurementcentral.co.uk. And from the website, of course, they can always go on to have a look at us on the social media. Yeah. But those 2 places, they'll come across pretty much most of our material and most of what we do. But it would be great if people wanted to connect with me or email us through the website. That would be fantastic. And by the way, I really enjoyed it, Philip, and it's been a great conversation with you. So thank you for arranging this.
No, you're more than welcome. We managed to stay clear of talking about football over the last 35 minutes, which is always a challenge whenever we get on the phone together.
Well, I was on a call, in fact, almost a week ago, and I happened to say, and they were talking about procurement and construction. And I said, well, it's funny you say that, because football is, in this particular case, football stadiums is always my go-to reference point whenever I'm teaching, whenever I'm talking, meaning, whoever's building a new stadium, we never seem to learn from the previous one. Yeah. There is an argument to say that, Tottenham Stadium, they wouldn't dare learn from Arsenal Stadium, of course, because that would be just completely the wrong thing to do. Yeah. But there's many of football stadiums that are built, and we forever seem to be, going back into the same problems and the same issues. So football, we can always bring football into any conversation, Philip, at any time. Always happy to do that.
Well, at least we managed to get the sports angle in through the Olympics, which was very direct and relevant. Well, Steve, I'm going to include links to your LinkedIn profile and to the website.
Thank you.
On the show notes page for today's episode, and listeners can find that just by going to artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you're going to find links to all of the podcasts that we published. Steve, one last time, just thank you so much for joining me.